Welcome back, guys. As usual, if you have a camera, please turn on your cameras. Let's check. Previous lecture, we were talking about technical skills. I would like to continue that line. You have a project. The project is due tomorrow, so you still have time today, tomorrow, a couple of hours to finish with things. Remember, I am expecting your product backlog, everything in your backlog. I want to review your product backlog items. I know that you have only one sprint, so basically your product backlog and your sprint backlog, the content is all your items. In particular, but not limited to that, we're going to review your stories, what you define as your functional requirements. That is maybe the most important thing that we're going to review, but not the only one. You have more than that in the backlog. So this is one thing. Second, we are going to review your burden chart. That is the most important thing regarding your team organization and your team working in the previous 10 days or whatever days you used to work. We're going to review your source code, and in particular, talking about the source code. Obviously, we are expecting that your code compile and run. Again, if you submit something that do not compile or do not run, that is going to affect your grade a lot. It's not a programming class, but we're expecting that you submit something that works according with the philosophy of this. So please, your source code should be there. Moreover, talking about your source code, well, the goal is that you apply the things that we reviewed in the previous lectures and the things that I am going to share with you today regarding clean coding. At least the 3 principles that we're reviewing. So please, hopefully by today, tomorrow, the only thing that you need to do is you have everything working, at least the functionality is almost there. You can use some hours to do refactoring and maybe clean your code, if that is something that you need to do. I do not ask for that. By the backlog, I mean the backlog, your items, a list of your items, all your stories. In particular, I want to look at your functional requirements, as I mentioned before. So your backlog, everything. Your source code, it is better if you submit your files, not a link to GitHub. Why? Because basically, GitHub, you can continue doing modifications and maybe someone do something wrong and whatever. Submit your files so the TA review the files there and there is no conflict regarding different versions. So please submit your source files. A Word or PDF could be okay with the backlog. I am not asking you for a particular format. Hopefully you are using a tool to keep your backlog. If that is not the case, I cannot ask you to use a tool because I do not know your background. But again, my goal is to review what do you think is your backlog? What do you use as your backlog? Which are your stories? And in particular, if you're using the tool, I am asking for the backlog at the beginning of the process, or the backlog that have everything, the biggest one, all your stories with all your cases, with all the information there. Do not eliminate anything. If you have the tool, you have everything there. The evolution of things, I am asking for the big list. So I am sure that from the tool you can export something, and that is the thing that we want to submit. Again, I want to review your stories. I want to review how you split the functional requirements and the functional requirements that you use to create the task and to work. That is the goal for this assignment. So the backlog, the burden chart, please review your chart. Be sure that it's a burden chart. I already showed you examples of things that are wrong. So please be sure that you submit the correct thing. I am not asking for any particular non-functional requirement. In fact, I think that the only non-functional requirement that I mentioned to you was using Java, using Swim. Other than that, there is no constraint or quality that I am asking you to follow for the project. So using Java or using Swing or any other thing is nothing really. So I don't care about the non-functionals really. The main point is going to be to evaluate that you really create stories to represent the functional ones. And I am going to show you something. I want to be sure that we are all in the same channel regarding this, or that at least you have time to review and fix things. So I am going to show you something regarding that, the stories. And I am going to show you errors regarding the source code that is not clean. So again, my goal is that you have still a couple of hours or days to fix things. Retrospective and review. I answered some emails regarding that. I am asking for one paragraph or two, and basically your summary of what you told with your team regarding what can you do better in a following sprint, or what could be the status of the product. So any feedback regarding the product, the people, your retrospective, your review, one paragraph or two about each, submitting a document. That's it. It's kind of an easy project, or a little bit. Yeah, remember the burden chart, the total of points, the total of time, the line that connect the points, and then the reality, what happened with you. That is basically the burden chart that I am expecting. So the total number of story points is up to you. The addition of everything that you calculate and estimate. The days, I am assuming that it's going to be something around 10, a little bit less maybe, but 10 days, the line, and the reality. That's it. It's up to you, depending on your experience. Again, this one here is about the effort. Story points is easy. Story points is democracy in your team. You do not need to have a particular experience. If you are an experienced team and if you want to work here, or did you estimate using an estimation of hours, I am fine with that. I mean, I am not asking you for a particular unit. The only thing is, remember, the y-axis is the effort. Story point, hours to work. Just be sure to remember that. What should be in the backlog? That is a very good question. There is a lecture in which we review the backlog. What is the content of the backlog? Items, right? And the items are 4 categories, right? And one of the categories is the features of the product. The features of the product, your stories. And your stories, remember me, the storyboard, the epics, the stories, and be careful to do not move to task or details. And all of them with a priority and with an estimation. Yeah, exactly that. So hopefully, thank you for helping me to answer the question. So that is what I am expecting. Again, if you follow the process with tools, you have previous experience with this, great. I really want to know, I want to review, what did you do? And 2 things. You understand what we reviewed before, and also I want to have an idea of your experience here. That's it. Good? Okay, so this is what I am expecting. Please remember, tomorrow, midnight, no extensions. Usually tomorrow, around 7, 8, there are going to be a lot of issues and a lot of things, and I am going to receive emails about extensions. Unless it's something that is in ASU policies, unless it's family, medical, or something like that, and several people in the team are involved for some reason, there are not going to be extensions. So whatever you have, submit. You are a team of 5. It could be very, very complicated that 5 people, all of you, have an emergency. So please submit whatever you have by tomorrow midnight. Now, talking about the main question that I have received, and something that I want to give you the opportunity to review. Regarding the question in the chat, please, the source code, submit your Java files. The TA is going to compile your projects. So it could be good that you basically submit your Java file, your classes. Either you can submit file by file, or you can put all the files in a zip. but do not copy them in a zip file, because basically that means that the TA is going to copy back to different files in order to have your Java files and being able to compile. So do not do that. Just create a zip, submit your zip, or add the files to Canvas. I think you can add all of them. So source code, submit your Java files, the chart, the product backlog, your review and so on. That could be PDF or Word, something like that. Please, if you're going to submit some document that is not like standard thing, Microsoft Word, use PDF. Some of you are using different environments, but the TA is not going to have access to different tools. Word for sure, Microsoft Office in any operating system, and PDF for sure. Other things, probably you're going to put the TA to figuring out how to review your file. So please, Word or PDF for the documents, and your source code, use the Java files. We're going to compile them. And it's a small system, so you can help the TA also if you do not use packages, because then the TA can just take the files and compile everything in the same folder. Again, it will be easy for him. We will appreciate that. Anyway, something that I want to share with you and be sure that this is clear. One example that I usually use to explain requirements is the Pac-Man video game. And the only reason is because I am sure that everyone here understands the requirements for the Pac-Man video game. All of us, hopefully, if someone is not in that case, please let me know. But I will assume that everyone here, if I mention the Pac-Man video game, we know the product. We know which are the features of that piece of software. Now, in the Pac-Man video game, if I ask you in the exam, which are the requirements? Hopefully, all of you can mention the requirements, all of you, because you know the software, you know what the software do. Now, talking about the game, hopefully you are aware that the different enemies, the different ghosts, the pink one, the orange one, and the others, they move in a different way. They are the enemies of the Pac-Man. However, they do not behave in the same way. They are particular rules that they follow in order to chase the Pac-Man. If you have played the game, you are aware of the situation. If not, use for you, the rules are explained on the internet. That particular link have the rules. And the rules are something like conditions. If the Pac-Man is moving in a particular direction, if the Pac-Man is doing a particular situation, a particular thing, a particular movement, a particular behavior, then the consequence is that every single one of these guys is going to behave in a particular way as a reaction of what the Pac-Man is doing. That is my summary of the Pac-Man rules for the ghost. Now, my question for you guys, do we put these rules in user stories? Do we explain with user stories the different conditions for the movement of the different enemies of the Pac-Man? And I have some answers in the chat, and 1, 2, 3, 4 people in a total of 80 are telling me no. And I am going to put this here for the video, for the people that review this later, for the appeals. You do not explain this in the stories. And as you mentioned in the chat, someone here helped me, is you put that in acceptance criteria. That are steps. The user story is the requirement, the functionality. The functionality could be that these guys are going to move. but the details about how that movement is calculated or the inference that you do, these ifs conditions, those are the steps. If you're working with Agile, that is the back of the car. That is your acceptance criteria. That are details. If you are working with UML, and I am going to mention this for the people in 360, is your requirements are use cases, the ovals. These details are an activity diagram that correspond to that use case. Details. Good. So you have, for this project, some particular rules. For instance, something that I mentioned to you to review is if you have 1, 2, 3 elements around an empty space, then in that empty space, you're going to have a new element, right? For mention one of the rules. 3 live entities, 3 yellow things, and then at the center, a new one is going to be born. That is a user story. Or is like this with the pack. What is the story? Which are the steps? Okay, I have one is not a user story. 1 of 80. Okay, 3, 4, good. Okay, I have 4 of 80. Good. So can we agree that that level of detail, 3 elements around and at the center, 1 is going to be born, or 5 around and the one at the center is going to die, those rules, those specifics about when and how a new yellow box is going to be drawn, or when and how a yellow box is going to become gray, those are details. Those are not stories. They are going to be in the back of your story, in the acceptance criteria of your story if you want, but they are not the story. So let me be clear. If I read, well, if the TA reads something like, as a cell, I want to die if there are 3 cells around me. Good or bad? And this could be for your exam. Okay, I have a very bad, and I am going to agree with that one. This is wrong. Okay. Several things here to review, but number one, this is wrong because this is not a story. This is a step of a story. This is a particular rule. This is, remember that we reviewed this if. Remember that in a lecture we mentioned that if you have an if, that is a condition for an activity diagram, and that is a step in a task. That is not a story. Just because the if, you know that is wrong. But if not because the if, because of its details. If not because it's details, because the actor. If not because the actor, the specific. Epics, stories, tasks, and steps. What we are going to review, yes, is that your project compile, yes, that your project run, yes, that you submit something that is equal to the software in the web page. But remember, it's not only that, because this is not a programming class. I need to be sure, we need to be sure that you are able to describe correct stories for your backlog, and your Bourbon chart is really representative of a team working with the process in the agile. So be very careful with your stories, really, and with your chart. So any question with this, please let us know. Before you submit, you still have time today, tomorrow. Send us an email to the TA, to me, clarify your doubts. It is better to clarify today, tomorrow, instead of sending us appeals next week. Usually the appeals doesn't help at all. Good? This is not correct. So I put cell there, and this is wrong. However, in a different case, and I am going to use the Pac-Man as an example. Sometimes the actor that starts the functionality is going to be the system, quotation mark the system. And for instance, with the Pac-Man, the movement of the Pac-Man, the movement of the yellow circle is something that the user is going to do. So the story or the functionality is connected with the user. As a user, I want to move the Pac-Man, or as a player, I want to whatever. The user is the player. The user is a person. But it is okay to mention, depending on the team, but it is okay to mention as a Pac-Man. The name of Pac-Man represent the user, not the Pac-Man as the entity inside of the game, but we are mentioning Pac-Man as a projection of the person that is using that avatar. So we can use Pac-Man, player, user to represent things that we want the user, the player, or the Pac-Man to be able to do. Is this idea of, as a player, I want to kill the enemy, not here, but in another game. As a Pac-Man, I want to kill the enemy, or as a player, I want to kill the enemy. Is this connection of the circle, the Pac-Man, as my extension or my presence inside of the game? That is one thing. When I am the user, the actor is the user, the player, or the entity that I am controlling if I want to talk in terms of the game, like the Pac. On the other part, sometimes it is true that we want the system to do things like if the system were alive. Usually when we are doing something with multi-threading, in this particular scenario, with the Pac-Man, it is true that we want to move the Pac-Man as a player, as a user, as a Pac-Man. There are things that I want to do. But also the enemy, in this case, the ghost, we want them to move, but they are kind of alive. I mean, they move alone in a smart way. Yeah, somehow that intelligence, quotation mark, is connected with observing the Pac-Man and what the Pac-Man is doing, and then I am going to plan my movement and I am going to move. But all this planning and observing and acting is like the system, because the system is the one doing that. Is some kind of thread inside of the software that is doing things that never was requested directly by the user. I mean, it's not like a game, one person against another person, in which one person is controlling the Pac-Man and another person is controlling the ghost. It's really a play or a system in which I am the user, I want to do some things, and indeed, the computer, the system, is doing things alone, by itself. I am asking for a threat. I am asking for some kind of, again, engine, intelligence inside. So for this particular scenario, and in particular, this is something that I do with the other class, 360. In a diagram, you can represent both the user and the system as actors. Actors can be people. And in particular, I chose this diagram because in the diagram, the actors are represented like these bodies. But it's exactly the same representation for a user, a human being, and a system or subsystem, because that idea of the system sometimes is going to be doing things alone. Here, the name is user and system, but this represents the Pac-Man. I could have Pac-Man and Ghost, or I can have player and enemy, or player and system. I have two actors talking about the Pac-Man video game. And if you notice the ovals, my ovals here, my use cases, correspond to something that you can put as a user stories, my functional requirements. And you can notice the functional requirements connected with the actor player, what the player wants to do, and also the functional requirements that are connected with the system itself, the movement of the ghost and whatever, the intersection. In some point, there is things that happen in common, the collision. The collision is, you can mention these different ways, but the collision means that the Pac-Man chase the ghost, or that the ghost kill the Pac-Man. You can handle the writing in both ways, but in some points, it's a common requirement. Both are moving and something should happen. Here, requirements, moving of the ghost, those are stories. The back of those stories, or the activity diagram connected with these use cases, with each of these, there is an activity diagram that shows these particular details of how the different colors of the different ghosts they move. Not because the color, but because the personality, quotation mark, that they have. So as a summary, actors with the user, yeah, most of them, not the developer, the final user. Stories for the system, quotation mark. If we can be more specific, the better, but stories connected with the system, also possible. My particular example here, obviously, do not make sense. In the scenario that you're developing, the cell, the yellow box, is not an entity that is alive, because you do not have a thread connected with each of those guys. At least that is not the solution for the software that you are doing. In fact, first, did I answer the question so far?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
For your system, I want to ask you, and maybe I am kind of trying to solve the work with you, but just to be sure, how many actors do you have in the project that you are doing, in this simulator for the cells? Actors. Can you agree with user and system? Someone mentioned in the chat, user and system. Can you agree that there are things that a user is going to do, and there are things that are going to happen without the user intervention? I am going to use a diagram just to make this more visual. Obviously, the goal with user stories is more like textual, but let me give you a diagram. And again, I do not want to solve the project yet. This is something that we can do next week, but just as a hint. If you have these two actors, the user and the system, what the user do? What are the functionalities, the functional requirements, the stories, the ovals, if you want, that you are going to connect with the user, the human being using the piece of software that you are developing? You give me some idea, right? Something that I asked you, I am not going to write the full story. Hopefully you are following me, and it's just like you are telling me about the pause. if I am pausing something, I am going to start something. This is going to be important, right? And there is this idea of clear, clean everything. Those are three important things that the user want to do. Those are three important functionalities connected with the game. I am a user. I am going to run your software. And according with this, things that I want to do is, number one, storyboarding. If I am running the things, I want to be able to stop. If I am bored, I want to be able to clean and restart. Basically, you can use here the clean, restart ideas. I am missing one thing here. What is the first thing that I am going to do when I run your software before starting even? Because starting is, I want this to run. This is something that you know from a different class, but hopefully you remember. We can connect these two guys, right? We can define an inclusion. Create cells is something that I want to do, is one of my requirements, something that I need to do. And instead of connecting with the user, you can connect with this one, is an inclusion there, dash line, whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4 things that you want to do with your user. I am not going to go to details, but these are the 4 main stories that you should have as a user. Yes or no? And hopefully you have this in your product backlog. At least those 4 stories connected with the user. As a user, something that I want to do is to create those yellow boxes. If you're following the philosophy of the game, again, it's like as a user, I want to create live cells, because that is what the box in yellow represent, right? So I want to create those. You do not need to mention the details about with the mouse in a particular position. Acceptance criteria, details, whatever. The story is I want to create those guys. That is what I want to do. Details in the back. I want to start the game. Again, I am doing here the use case diagram, but something that the only thing that you need to know is, yeah, I want to create these guys, and in some point I want to start, and start mean click one option. You do not put that in the story, click the option. You want to start, and that happens when you click something. You want to stop. Okay, that is other thing that you want to do, and you want to restart. My actions. Now, we have another actor, the system. What things the system do? And again, I do not want to solve the full project, but can you tell me at least one? There is something that happened that someone else is doing that is not me, the main actor. Evolution. Again, this is a game. You can express the idea in different ways, but if you are inside of the philosophy of the game, the idea here is that the system is the one that read the current generation, the current situation in the world, the live cells there, and it's going to do the evolution. That basically means it's going to calculate the next generation, right? So we have generation 1, and the system is going to calculate the next generation. If you think in a computational way, what you have is an array, and what you're going to do is to calculate a second array using the first one as an input. From the first array to the second array, something is going to happen, and that something is a particular algorithm, a loop with ifs. Exactly. All the details that you can think about for the game, all the details, like the details of the Pac-Man, those details are several of them inside of this story. And hopefully you agree with me on that. And hopefully the system that you developed in the past 10 days follow this, right? What we mentioned before, all these ifs like this if is really inside a story, maybe like that one. You maybe have one story or two or three or four. There are different approaches with this. The only thing that I am sure you should not have is stories that correspond to the rules. Again, the rules are the details, the steps of one story or a group of stories, depending on how you split things. This is more or less the most important points for your project, and hopefully you have something like this. Good. Well, it's your first attempt, so hopefully the key idea is, for instance, if I start working with this as the thing that I want to do, I am not missing a story here. What maybe you are missing could be are tasks inside of one story. And usually if that happens, well, you connect that with the next sprint. You don't have a next sprint here. So what I am going to ask you to do is add that to your repository and therefore update your chart. It's not exactly what should happen. Again, that is the reason of the planning of the sprint. But if by any chance that happened to you, please update everything. And update everything means that if you start thinking that you have here in the work to do 500 story points, but then you figure out that it's more, well, update this and show 600, 700 or whatever, and update your line for everything. So do not give me a burn-down chart that suddenly go up in some point. That is not the point. Always down. So again, hopefully it don't happen, but worst case scenario, update totally. You can do it. Again, in this particular assignment, because I am just giving you one quotation mark sprint, you can do that, even if you finish and you want to add things. But again, in your chart, when you submit your chart, just make the report as if since the beginning, you consider all the tasks, not something like suddenly go up and then go down. So it's not like you add here more tasks and then go up, but you have them from the beginning, even though the truth is that you added in the middle. You only have one sprint, so I cannot ask you to put that in the product backlog and wait for the next sprint. That is not going to happen. So just update everything. Good. Okay, so key ideas for the stories. Yeah, of course. Remember, when you have the burn-down chart, you are plotting there everything related with your sprint, everything related with the work that you are going to do in that particular loop. And what you are going to have in the product backlog, in your sprint backlog, is product backlog items. and that includes the four categories that we mentioned before. It's not only about the requirements, it's not only about the features, the stories that you have, but also about everything else. Obviously, you do not have bugs to fix because you're just starting, but knowledge acquisition can be involved. Just please remember, knowledge acquisition regarding the project. So in this scenario, probably a framework like learning Java Swing, I could be okay with that. But anything related with installing my IntelliJ IDE, that is something that is assumed you have it in your working environment. You do not put something like that. So very specific things related with the project. The only thing that I can imagine in this scenario is maybe you use some time to learn Java Swing. Learning to program in Java is also not an option. Learning to program in Java, you are supposed to be working in the project because you already know Java. In fact, that could be a prerequisite for being hired in the company or for being accepted in the class. So learning to program in Java, no. Java Swing, that could be one thing for knowledge acquisition. And yes, you can put that in your story points or in the hours that you estimate, and therefore you can go down when you accomplish that goal. You can do the chart with any tool. Yeah, there is no problem with that. Just be sure that you submit a chart that makes sense, and you can review previous lectures for checking that. Good. So hopefully we agree with the requirements, the stories, and so on. I am sharing with you what could be the use case diagram for the Pacman. I did this with another students. So the Pacman is not so different from the project that I asked you to do. And the use cases are not so different from the user stories. They are not the same, but the goal is to document requirements. So maybe taking a look here, and if I told you that these are all the user stories, the requirements for a Pacman video game, you can have an idea of what things are stories and what things are tasks or steps that should not be included as a story, but more as a validation. So I am giving you this. Developers. Now, developers are not actors in the user stories. The actors should be the user, as I mentioned before, the user of the system, and sometimes the system itself, if the system is doing something alone, but the developers are not. Something that you need to be careful, and someone mentioned the developers. There are two different things. One thing is a story or a user story. And when we talk about a story or a user story, what we are talking about is a requirement, in particular, a functional requirement. We follow a template as I want to. This is a template, and we follow this template to document user stories. The point is, not everything that follow the template is by default a user story. So just as the example that I gave you before, as a cell, I want to blah, 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 not because I am following the template, as I want to, I am following the template, but this is not a story. This is not a functional requirement. The template do not guarantee a story. The story follow the template, yes, but that is only one of the things that a story have following the template. So something that you do, something that you can do, something that you found on the internet. Is following the template as a whatever. I want to, whatever. is following the template. Is a story like a requirement, particularly like a functional requirement? And hopefully your answer in the exam for this example is a big no. Agree? I am using the template. Good for you. But that one is not a story. The developer, as you mentioned, is not part of the actors in the system. What could be the goal of using the template like this? You want to document knowledge acquisition. You want to put an item in the backlog for knowledge acquisition, and just to look good and to be consistent with other items, you want to put something like this. It's a template. If you want to follow the template, okay, it's not a story. It's an item. It's a documentation of a knowledge acquisition that you want to do, not a story, not a requirement of the system. And that should be clear. 4 different categories of product backlog items. Only one of the categories is connected with features in the system, with stories per se. Again, for the items, a common practice is to use the template. Using the template for whatever you want is fine. It's a template, but you need to be careful that not because it's the template, therefore it's a story. So yeah, that is something that you need to be careful. One thing is the template, but in order to be a story, there are several different things that you need to review. It's the same template for an epic. It's the same template for a story, but the template, the epic, the story, they are different. In this example, it's the same template for the story and for knowledge acquisition, but knowledge acquisition is not a story. It's not a feature, not a requirement. 2 different things. Not really. I have a question regarding non-functional requirements. So far, if I remember correctly, the only thing that I asked you was use Java Swing for the graphics part. So nothing in JavaFX, no fancy libraries. In fact, my goal is that the TA can just compile your projects using standard Java libraries. You can assume that the TA, the same that myself, we have, I don't know, Java 11 in the computers. I mean, nothing fancy, but nothing too old. Anything that you are using, I think is going to be there. Even if you are using some functional programming, we should be able to compile. Java 8, usually that is fine, right? I mean, I really think that you do not need anything fancy and anything new. If you are using something particular for Java 15, we can talk about the particularities, but I think that most of your projects are going to compile with Java 8 without any problem. If you have any particular question about, hey, I do not know if this is knowledge acquisition or if this is a user story, I think the best thing that could happen is you can send me an email. I have this story, or I have this particular item, what it is, or what question you have. And I usually can answer that question by email with a yes, no, maybe, something like that. So send me an email. Good. Okay. I have received this question several times by email regarding the midterm. I replied to several people. Our midterm is the goal in the week 8 or 9. So remember, we have 16 weeks, more or less. The exam is going to be week 8, week 9. That is the first or the second week of March, which basically means that next week I am going to give you the exact date. I am not sure if it's going to be a Thursday or a Tuesday. I need to review the topics that we're going to close for the exam, but week 8 or 9, which basically mean early March, that is going to be your midterm. And for the final, well, we're going to follow the ASU schedule. So March, your midterm, and the last week of April, your final. Okay. Going back to the details, programming. I just want to be sure that we have a global picture of what you're going to submit. Let me be clear. In this class, I am not grading the software design. That is another class. So I am not going to be reviewing, or I am not asking you for a class diagram or for a particular use of dependencies and connections. Not yet, even though we're going to review some of them. But for this project, the source code. Now, clean source code, we start reviewing that before. However, sometimes doing clean source code is connected with a good design. I am not going to go to the details, but I want to give you a picture of what we are expecting in your software, and just to check if you agree with me or not. Do you think that this, what I put on the screen, could be more or less classes that your project is going to have, in particular, that the 3 orange rectangles could be at least 3 classes for your project? Do you think that your project should have at least 3 classes? 3 classes that you are going to program. It could be 4. I put 1 extra in green. My point is, your program is not going to be only 1 file. It's not going to be only 1 class. Should not be. Whether or not you are aware of model view controller, whether or not you have experience or knowledge of software architecture or some design patterns, even if you do not have that experience, just following good practices of programming, hopefully you agree with me that your program cannot be only 1 file. Hardly is going to be 2. 3 is kind of the minimum that hopefully you are going to have there. Why 3? You need a graphical user interface. You're going to be using action listener, key listeners, and hopefully you're familiar with that. You need a window on the screen. The window, the listener, all of that is kind of asking for 1 class. Moreover, all of them are connected with one of the requirements that we defined previously. All of them can be connected with this idea of, well, the user want to play the game. Whether you use start or create cells or whatever, it doesn't matter what you start, but you need something in the system that is going to have the listeners, the frame, and the core of your program. I am calling that class game, whatever. You can use whatever name you want, but my point is, hopefully you agree with me that you need a class that is the core of everything. And that core is going to have maybe this, maybe this, maybe this, I don't know, could change. Second, this is 1 class. One of people in your team, hopefully is working with all the graphical user interface, maybe the menu, maybe the J bottoms at the bottom part. If you're copying the graphical user interface, you have something at the center, you have controls down, maybe you move the controls in a menu, I don't know, but that is 1 big task. Second, hopefully you agree with me that the core of the project is something that is going to be happening with this grid. And when I call grid, there are 2 things there. Number 1, the drawing of the grid. Everything that is related with this space in which you are going to draw the grid and you are going to paint the yellow things. The yellow things And that grid is going to be inside of the main window. It's going to be somehow connected with the game. In UML, grid and game are an aggregation, one inside of the other. The mouse is something that you can put here, or maybe you can even add there different solutions. I don't care. Game, the grid as part of the visual things. And finally, this is view, and you need something, one or more, to do the model, the functionality, one place to put the algorithms, one place in which you are going to have an array with the information, not with the visuals, with the information. And using this array as an input, you are going to apply the rules, and you're going to create another array as an output. And these arrays are the ones that you're going to share with the panel that is showing the yellow boxes. You are showing yellow boxes on the screen, but in the background, what you have is use an array with information that you use to calculate the next generation in a loop, like someone mentioned in the chat. And generation, loop, another generation, show this, now show this, calculate another one, show this one. And it's a loop that you stop with one option and continue, and that loop continue there. If this is clear, this looks like what you are doing. Yes or no? Okay, at least one yes. Good. So, important thing, guys. You can question in the chat. You can use a grid with J bottoms. Yes, you can. If you think about the performance, it's not exactly the best solution. Thinking about the performance, you can do it. It's going to be kind of slow, your system, compared with another version in which you use mouse listener and you paint the yellow boxes like draw, instead of every one of them is a widget, because it's kind of a big grid. So my suggestion, drawing, it could be better than the widget with labels or J-bottoms. But, well, the important thing is you need to separate, or hopefully you are separating, the graphical user interface, where you are drawing things or using widgets, and the data that calculate the generation and control everything. Again, you are a team of 5. If you do not separate the project in at least these 3 classes, 4 classes, what did you do to work together as a team? If you submit only one class, how is that 5 people work in one class, in one file? It's kind of hard to believe. Anyway, something that you are doing is, as we mentioned before, there is an actor that is the system, and that actor that is the system is the computer doing things alone, the computer doing things without being asked for a user. In the software, this action listener, this mouse listener, they are the representation of there is a user working. The action listener, if you're using widgets, the mouse listener, because the click of the mouse, those two are the result of this actor player. But the other actor, the actor system, the enemy or the intelligence or whatever, this other actor doing things at the end in the source code is going to be in your system. You are using, talking about Java, you have a runnable, a thread, the class thread, or at least you are using something like the class timer. It's a thread, controlling with the time. I am looking forward to read your source code, and 90% for sure you have one of those, right? I mean, somehow you are solving the idea of calculate the generation. If you do not have a thread, the big issue that you're going to have is you can start a loop here to calculate the generations. But if you want to stop, if you want your system to react to the stop or pause with only one thread, you are going to have a race condition. This option, the stop, sometimes is going to work and sometimes it's not. You need to have a thread here and another thread for the graphical user interface, right? So that is the only way in which you can make sure that the controls are going to react. And somehow you need to connect both of them. This thread, stop, a variable, a method, something is going to happen to tell this one to stop. I want to review what is that connection that you use. And we're going to talk about different options later, but I want to check what you do as a team. So 4 classes, hopefully 3 classes at least, and the blue ones, the libraries that I am looking forward to so involved in your code. And again, hopefully this more or less represent what you are planning to submit tomorrow. Yes, any question? Requirements, global structure of the design, you are good. This is what you are doing. And the silence hopefully is a lot of yes there. Okay, so another thing, and I received this email and I want to share with everyone just because I am being told that it's a problem that several of you have. So tell me, this is a question in your quiz, which of the following statement is correct? A, B, C, D. Just want to be sure that we are clear there. It's a question that could be again in your exam, so I want to be sure that it's clear. Okay, according with the chat, everyone agreed that it's A. Yeah. Okay, so that is the answer. Good. Backlog is the backlog. Anyone can help me? Okay, never mind. Good. So, guys, you agree that the solution is A, and then I could assume that this is a question only one person, or not the people, the 75 people here. Okay, the answer is A. Hopefully we agree with that. At least, again, the people in the chat, and I am assuming that the silence of the rest of the people means that you also agree. So good. If we talk about stories, as I mentioned before, hopefully with my explanation, stories, user stories are connected with the requirements. It's a different story that you can use the template, the same template for other things. But using the template is not the only thing that you do in order to create a story. As I mentioned before, you can use the same template for an epic or for a story. It's a story not only because it's in the template, but because other things that we review, and you can take a look of the videos of the previous 2 weeks. So option A, if you found this question again in your exam, we agree. Option A, that's it. Good. Okay, silence, assuming that is good. Great. Okay, guys. So your code, and I have 5 minutes, so I am going to move quickly here. Something that we're going to review in your source code: keys, dry, and the guidelines. I am going to focus in those three things. The guidelines. You know the guidelines. I put on a slide at the end with a link to the Java guidelines if you need to review them. So we're going to review the guidelines. Those include basically not limited, but two things are the most important. Number one, the names for the classes, methods, and variables. Again, it's not the only thing, but something that we're going to review very, very careful is the names that you use for your classes, methods, and variables. And hopefully you remember the correct name for a class, a method, or a variable. Particularly, if you have a verb, that is the name of a method. If you want to put a name for the class or for the variable, that is a noun. So your names, be careful with your names. And something that I am asking you to be careful also and check, remember, you add documentation to your classes. Javadoc in particular, Javadoc is not redundant. Javadoc is to create this HTML that is the API of your classes. The people that usually read the Javadoc is not the same people that is reading your source code. And there are rules to create the Javadoc. You can review that in the link that I am sharing with you. We reviewed some ideas in the previous class. I am going to review some examples quickly in the following slides. Keys and dry. So quickly, what do you think about this example? Graphical user interface with some variables, in particular labels. And this example in particular for someone that asked me, what about using bottoms for the grid? You're going to have a lot of bottoms, J bottoms, or a lot of J labels. What do you think about this source code? Is good? Is not good? Can be improved? And if so, what can we do to improve? Good or bad? Bad. Why? Can be improved? Yes. Did you notice that I have a lot of labels here? And I have a lot of panels here. What can we do to make all these lines, almost 10 lines, only one? Or all these lines, also more than 10 lines, only one? And I agree with that. The names are also kind of bad. But thinking about programming, what can we do to make this small? Because remember, readability, no one likes to read a lot of things. And moreover, no one likes to read something that is the same. It's boring. What can we do to eliminate 10 lines and maybe have only one? That is another good thing. All these can be local variables. The fact that they are global is wrong. But well, copy paste, local. And also, yes. Use arrays. It could be an static array, or you can play with dynamic data structures. For this particular example, is use the panels and the labels. They are not going to increase or decrease. A common, trivial, simple array is the best solution. Because instead of reading 10 lines, I can read 2 lines, an array of labels, an array of panels. And moreover, you can move those arrays from the global to the local, because graphical user elements do not need to be global. They are only needed inside of the constructor, really. So these 2 lines can be local, but well, that's a different story. If you're working with the grid and you're using labels or JBottom for the grid, just be careful to put those guys in an array. Do not give me 100 lines with variables that are basically widgets. Moving forward, this one. What do you think about this here and probably those 3 lines there. There is any way that we can change those lines? Because again, looks like there are lines that are the same. And when you read lines that are the same or so similar, immediately it's like it's boring to read. And if it's boring for the reader, someone is going to make a mistake. Objects. Can you agree with me that somehow, if we replace these things with an array, we can replace this here with a for loop or some kind of loop? And inside of the loop have only one line. I have one yes, and hopefully that represents the rest of the people here. If you use arrays, you can use loops. And if you use loops, one line, and you can run that line several times instead of these 3 or instead of all this. What can we do with these strings here? Because everything else is the same, but looks like, well, we can do an array with these ones, but what can we do with the names? It's kind of a string, and the only thing that I leave there is something named something. So there are names. What can we do with names when they are involved in some source code similar to this one? Good practices. If you have text, if you have names, strings that are used like this, what do you do with them? Yes. The resource file, the best solution, yes, but at least constants. An array of constants is an array, is final, is static. You put there your strings, and then here, the only thing that you need is you can put this in a loop, and this is the name of your array of constants with a particular index for that particular element. Makes sense? My request for you guys, you are doing a graphical user interface, and I am sure that your graphical user interface is going to need loops, because I am asking you for a grid, and the grid is going to have things inside, and you're going to be painting things around those things. You are going to have at least one loop inside of another loop, if not more, depending on your programming. Please be careful that you do not have in your source code things like this, or this, or even this. Be careful with do not repeat yourselves. Be careful with keep the things simple. And I am going to stop here, but I am giving you in the slides more examples of things that should not happen. Can you tell me quickly what is the problem with this? And I am circling the key ideas. Oh, indentation, yes, but check the try catch. A stack of try catches. Can we agree that we do not need that? Can we agree that we can handle this with only one try catch? Oh, with only one try, you can have several catch associated with that one try, but you do not need to do the nested. Okay. So I am going to leave this in the slides. Please review the slides. If you have any question regarding your code, still today, tomorrow, please do not be afraid to ask, because when you submit, we're going to rate, and we're going to assume that at least you are following some good practices. One question that I have in the chat is, what can you do if you are in a loop and you want to create objects from different classes? My answer for that, the key solution, polymorphic behavior. The solution for that is, if you have several classes and if you can put a common parent, then you can create the array from that common parent, and then you can do the instantiation inside of a for loop, and maybe inside you can have a condition, and according with some particular condition, create one or the other, but doesn't matter which one is the one that you are creating, go to the same array from the class parent, and later you can make the polymorphic behavior of the elements in the array. So polymorphism could be the answer that I could give to that one. We can review the specifics, but that is in general the solution. Good, guys. Any other question? Okay, guys, I am going to stop here. See you next lecture. Please do not forget to submit. Thank you.